Welcome back to the Knife Life, everybody. Today we're going to be taking a look at the socket bayonet. The socket bayonet was one of the most feared weapons of its time. Used in conjunction with a musket to which it was affixed, these were the two weapons that were the mainstay armaments of armies throughout the 18th and 19th centuries. While the musket was the primary weapon of the rank-and-file soldier, the socket bayonet was their official sidearm. When the bayonet was fixed onto the muzzle of a musket, it was essentially converted into a 6-foot-long spear, while still allowing the musket to be loaded and fired. The bayonet itself is relatively simple. While there are many variations, they all retain the same general form. All socket bayonets have a blade, shank, socket, and a mortice of some kind. Additional features often seen on bayonets are ferrules at the base of the socket, locking mechanisms, rain guards at the conjunction between the blade and the shank, and so on. Blade profiles can also vary widely from full-on dagger-bladed configurations to oval-shaped cross-sections to the three-sided spike. So let's take a closer look at the mechanisms to fix a bayonet. In order to attach or fix the bayonet, the musket must first have a bayonet lug on its barrel. This lug interacts with the bayonet's mortice in order to prevent the bayonet from falling off or simply sliding back down the barrel while trying to stab an enemy soldier. Early bayonets often made do with only an I or L type mortice and with no locking mechanism. And as you can imagine, these ran the risk of the bayonet coming loose. Early American bayonets incorporated a T mortice into their design so that the lug would either push forwards or backwards into a secure groove during a thrusting or recovering motion. Locking mechanisms were later introduced in order to better secure bayonets. Wing nuts were an easy solution, but were easily lost and can be over-tightened onto the barrel. Leaf springs were added to sockets to lock the lug into the final mortice slit. One of the most effective locking mechanisms was the French incorporation of a retaining ring into the socket of the bayonet itself, such as on this original 19th century bayonet. The ring was oriented so that the lug could bypass it. Then the ring would be rotated to 90 degrees to close the path of egress for the bayonet and lug until the bayonet was to be unfixed. All of this is good and well, but why would anybody want to put a knife on the end of their gun instead of just shooting something? Well, the socket bayonet can trace its roots back to the pike and shot formations of the 15th and 16th centuries. At that time, the matchlock musket was the greatest advancement in weaponry. Formations of arquebus infantry armed with matchlocks could be quite deadly to the enemy, but easily overrun by enemy cavalry or massed melee infantry. Matchlock troops therefore had to stay close to and rely on the pike formations for protection. At some point during this time, a soldier or hunter got sufficiently desperate after missing his shot that he took his knife and stuck it in the barrel of his gun to ward off his attacker. And thus, the plug bayonet came into being, and it's essentially just a dagger with a tapered grip to wedge into the muzzle of the musket. We'll do a separate video on that later. Now, the use of the plug bayonet in combination with the creation of the flintlock allowed musket infantry formations to brace against and survive cavalry attacks. Well, the problem with the plug bayonet is that it is, well, a plug. You can't load and shoot with it, and so long story short, the socket bayonet evolved to solve that problem. Generals also developed alternative uses rather than just holding off cavalry. A regiment fixing bayonets and advancing onto an enemy position was often enough to intimidate the enemy forces into withdrawing from their positions. While the bayonet was an extremely deadly weapon, it largely became a weapon of intimidation. Recorded casualty counts show low numbers for bayonet injuries throughout the Napoleonic Wars and the American Civil War, but they were effective in driving units from their ground. An excellent example of this was the charge of the 20th Maine at the Battle of Gettysburg, driving a larger force back in retreat. There was little emphasis put on individual training with the bayonet. The American military didn't train bayonet fighting until George B. McClellan translated M. Gomard's system to English from French in 1852. McClellan states in the preface of his translation, "When in the habitual formation as infantry of the line, the small interval allowed each file and the method of action of masses will prevent the possibility or necessity of the employment of much individual address." Bayonet training became useful when the lines had dissolved in the chaos of battle or when in open order, such as when deployed as skirmishers. In these circumstances, the bayonet proved to be an effective and deadly weapon. McClellan identifies a number of circumstances where the individual soldiers used their bayonets to fight off a multitude of attackers, and further research yields similar scenarios. After all, a fixed bayonet greatly resembles a 6-foot spear, and any experienced Western martial artist will tell you that a spear holds a number of advantages over other melee weapons. The days of muzzle-loading arms have long since passed, and the lack of need for a bayonet that allows for a ramrod was a driving factor in the switch to sword-style bayonets. But at one time, the socket bayonet was one of the defining forces on the battlefield. If you want to learn more about bayonets, here are some of the books that drove my research. Another excellent source is worldbayonets.com. I will leave links to all of these down in the video below for you to find. If you like this video, please consider liking and subscribing. I have other videos like this on my channel, as well as many other knife-related subjects. Until next time, stay safe and keep living the knife life.